October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria attack Israeli forces on two fronts. They're determined to take back all the territory they lost in the Six-Day War of 1967. Syrian armored brigades strike at 2 points on the Golan Heights, throwing 50,000 infantry and 1,200 tanks into the battle. In the rugged and hilly northern sector, Israeli defenders hold the line through the first day of fighting, even though they're outnumbered almost 7-1 and take heavy casualties. But in the more open country farther south, the Syrians seem unstoppable.
In the south, you have two very aggressive Syrian commanders. They dragged their bridging equipment forward. One of their commanders actually had his infantry fill in portions of the Israeli anti-tank trench by hand. They crossed over, and they were able to mass so much power against these thinned-out Israeli defenses in the southern flank of the Golan that they were able to punch through.
October 7th. After a day of fierce fighting, the Israeli southern line falls apart under a massive onslaught of Syrian armor. By 8 a.m., Syrian forces are advancing across the Golan Plateau, driving towards key bridges crossing the Jordan River.
The Syrian assumption was that if they could punch through those Israeli lines and drive as fast as they could, grab those bridges, they would effectively be able to prevent Israeli reserves from mounting a viable counterattack out of Galilee.
At 2 o'clock, when I heard the alarm, I opened immediately the radio. I heard the BBC announcing that the war started in Israel.
A heavy battle of armored forces is continuing on the Golan Heights as Syrian armor has been attempting to break the Israeli line and has, according to the news here, been checked by Israeli tanks and artillery.
I called my unit, the brigade, and they told me, come immediately, there is a war. The roads were empty, I drove like a hell, and the feeling was that they caught us unprepared.
In 73, the tanks were bare of ammunition and equipment. They had to be loaded with shells and all of the equipment taken out of storage and organized.
If you have the full crew, which are 4 members, it takes something like 4 to 6 hours to prepare it really properly. But during the rush time, we didn't really prepare properly the tanks.
Everybody went to the Golan Heights, doesn't matter how many tanks he had, if the tanks are completely equipped or not. They just went.
Syrian intelligence estimates it will take Israel 20 hours to mobilize its tank reserves, but the Israelis do it in 10. Throughout the night, Israeli reservists make their way to the battlefield, are hastily organized into units, and thrown into the fight against the Syrians. By the early hours of October 7th, the first tanks reach the Golan Heights.
In the early morning, we advanced towards the enemy already inside the Golan Heights. Dawn was beginning to break, and we saw lots of tanks. A mask of sorts came down. Now we have to do what is necessary. You don't think about it too much. We open fire on them, but directional alignments are required to match the barrel of the cannon to the cross of the telescope. But we didn't do this because of our hurried exit. We didn't hit them. It is possible to make battle time alignments, but this is a lot less precise. But it's better than nothing. We hit a few tanks. But not long after this, I saw a very large cloud of dust coming from the southeast. And when this cloud got closer, It turns out that it was a very large Syrian force with T-62 tanks.
It's the last thing the outnumbered Israelis want to see on the battlefield. The T-62 is an upgraded version of the T-55. Those upgrades include 240 millimeters of frontal armor and a bigger 581 horsepower engine. But the biggest threat is the T-62's 115 millimeter Malot main cannon. Its smooth bore design increases muzzle velocity, giving it a range of nearly 3,000 meters.
And then I honestly started to feel that I was being targeted, and shells are falling beside me or behind me. And if the first one is long, the next shell will be short, and then the next will hit me. So I reverse off the firing ramp and look for a new position. We started the battle with maybe 5 or 6 tanks against this very large Syrian force. All that was left for us to do was try to fight a stalling battle, but they simply pushed us backward.
It's overwhelming. 4 Syrian brigades, 350 tanks, push through Israeli defenders and advance towards the bridges over the Jordan River.
Before dark, both of them run into very small groups of Israeli infantry. And even though at this point in time they're only a couple of kilometers from their objectives, both brigade commanders decide to stop for the evening, and with almost nothing standing in their way. The bridges were sitting there. They were theirs for the Syrians' taking. And when they woke up the next morning, they found strong Israeli forces guarding those 2 bridges.
My battalion met them on the road from the Betecha Valley up to the Golan Heights. The first tanks in our column, they didn't see them. Only the last tank saw them, and he began to shoot. And the commander